Hello, welcome in this new session of the course for FUB. We have new participants. If they want to introduce themselves, they are welcome too. If not, we're gonna start with a little review of what we've done last week. And if you can open the latest document I posted with the outline of the class, that would be very good. We could start with what I named additions. Anybody wants to introduce themselves?
I can start. Hi,
okay.
I'm Margaret. This is my first time taking a class with FUB, so I'm just trying it out and see how it goes, and I'm excited to read more and learn more. So
that's good.
Hello. Anybody else? No? Niall, maybe you're not new. No, I don't think so.
Niall's got shy. It's not like him.
Let's start with what I called understanding the system, the pattern of neoliberalism. We talked about that last time, and what I didn't have time to say was that there is something that we could, a concept created by Deleuze and Guattari called mot d'ordre, which I think is badly translated in the translation of Masumi of 1,000 Plateaus.
Could you hold that up again, Antoine? Because I didn't catch the line jumped before that, so I want to look at that book. Okay, thank you.
That's the
Plateaus.
The English version. I do recommend the original version if you read French.
Okay.
The Anti-Oedipus is really tough to read, but that's the next of the series on capitalism and schizophrenia. And I would say it's way more enjoyable and easier to read. Yeah, I won't argue because it depends on everybody's taste. So mot d'ordre, I think, is badly translated by slogan. And I would argue that it's better translated by what Lingui offers as its main translation of mot d'ordre, which is watchword. And watchword seems to me a better word. Why? Because first there's the word word in it, and second there isn't the word order in it, but there is the connotation of an army context. And the example they give is the soldier gave the watchword to the sentry to pass the checkpoint. And I think that in the context that is given to us by the last article by Naomi Klein and the one we are going to read today on the protest, the demonstrations in the US. It is very much what we could call a military context with a militarized police. And the notion of mot d'ordre, if you read the chapter, which is called Postulates of Linguistics, has much to do with politics. It's a blend between linguistics, it's using linguistics, and actually Deleuze and Guattari criticizes Chomsky, even though Chomsky is a wonderful thinker. They criticize Chomsky for the simplicity of his arguments on linguistics. And, you know, they offer the image of the rhizome. Is that the way you say it in English? A rhizome? Like a potato is a rhizome?
Potatoes, yes, rhizome.
They oppose the rhizome to the tree, as you may know. And the tree is not only the tree as it is in nature, but the linguistic tree, with the dichotomies. I don't know if you've seen some in Chomskyan linguistics. Well, I'm not gonna develop on that, but let's say just that they are blending their new ideas on linguistics with a political thought that consists in saying that a mot d'ordre, watchword, is when the power says, now it is so, such as what we experienced with the COVID. At some point in France, they said, oh, masks are useless. And then they said, oh, you should wear a mask. That's a watchword. And it passes between people, and then we have to act a certain way. And we're going to keep this in mind for the next text. I want to link that to point 1.2, frame hysteria, which does remind us of the phrase that Herman and Chomsky were using, quoting Lippmann in 1922, the idea of manufacturing consent. To frame hysteria sounds to me a lot like what could be called manufacturing consent in a different way, though, because manufacturing consent, you're actually keeping a people as peaceful and quiet as possible, whereas the other strategy, the new pattern, if you will, is the very opposite in a sense. It's not to manufacture consent, but to frame hysteria. And we're going to go back to that also when we read the article for today. Naomi Klein says that the idea of framing hysteria, what she calls framing hysteria, plays a softening up function, which plays in favor of pro-corporate policies. Any remarks so far from you?
Only one.
Yeah.
And that is that I suppose that links in with the reading that you asked us to do. Sorry if anybody hasn't done, and I'm just adding to the homework thing. It was about, wasn't it, about Tillerson and Pence?
Yeah.
So there's a little link there that I see with that last bit when you talk about softening up function for the corporates, because they seem very much in that mold, or in actual fact, there wasn't much softening up. They just went straight in for the kill, unfortunately.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. So an exception in a way.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I'm going to the point 2, the big number 2 now. Perceiving the invisible. I forgot to say, or I didn't have time or wit to remember to say, that in a sense, they use a strategy to make their agenda invisible and therefore work. It's by rendering it invisible that they make it work. And that's arguable, as Scott was saying, but because in a sense, politicians these days, we can think of Bolsonaro, we can think of Trump, etc., Putin, etc. They are very blunt with the actions they undertake. So it's discussable in a way if the role of the philosopher is still in the times that we are living to make something invisible visible. Yes, it's the role that Naomi Klein was trying to play, but when something is so explicit, when it demands very little critical ability to see that a political leader has some links with the radical far-right parties of his country. Then, what is the role of the philosopher?
Well, in this case, I suppose it's actually putting forward that there's a whole agenda behind it. It's not just the economics or the political, it's the whole system.
Yeah. You remember before and during the election and the first months of Trump's presidency, people were saying that he was just a puppet, which is something that Chomsky says, is just a puppet that the Republican Party is using. They are shaking him to make people care about what he does, what he says, which is very loud and visible, and underneath do all kinds of economics, financial things that are more structurally important and that are less perceivable. We can think, for instance, of BlackRock, and some people who know about how the financial system works may tell us a lot more than I can on what BlackRock does. There was actually a very good documentary on the French TV recently on Envoyé Spécial on BlackRock that is findable online. Okay, so I think this paradigm of the idea that the philosopher still has something to render, that they have something to render visible, it still works. Okay. Point 3, understanding now, past and future, as I said. The agenda becomes all the more perceivable when you place their current action in perspective of their long-term career, war in Iraq, drilling, etc. And I wanted to link that to the fact that was unfortunately maybe forgotten unless you really care about Foucault, that Foucault's last project was to work on a history of war. I don't know if you know, you probably do, that Foucault's last books were a history of sexuality in the broadest sense possible, which has to do with reproduction, with eroticism, and also with how our society is in many ways different from ancient civilizations, the Greek and the Latin civilizations. Okay, so at the end of this project, his new project, he was done with that, was to work on war. You can get this information from Les 10 Écrits, which are two big books compiling his stuff, and also from recordings of his cours au Collège de France. He was working more on economics at the Collège de France than on sexuality. The link between the economics and his work on the history of sexuality was probably the care of the self, the idea of the care of the self. Okay, so what I want to say is, what would Foucault have found or wanted to argue if he had had time to work on this new project on war? I think, from what I heard, that as some of us think, he was thinking that we are always at war, even when we think we are at peace. Right now, as you may know, the tribes in the Amazon forest consider themselves at war with the political chief of Brazil. they think that he is the main figure of power, of industrial power that has for only goal to make as much money as possible from the forest. And they will do it even if that means a Holocaust. Okay, that reminded me, those declarations that I saw in the news recently reminded me of what Lévi-Strauss, you know, the ethnographer Lévi-Strauss, Claude Lévi-Strauss, was saying at the end of his life. He lived, I think, a bit more than 100 years, or just 100 years. And at the end of his life, he was quite pessimistic and bitter, seeing all the destruction of cultures happening in the world and in the spaces where he had done most of his studies. And he was saying that if the world continues on this path, that it's more and more mainstreamization and less singularity of peoples, he was no more interested in living on this planet. Okay. For point 4, agentivity.
You repeat that word?
Agentivity.
Je n'ai pas compris, hein?
Agentivité. Agentivity.
Okay, thanks.
We mentioned it last time, but what I did not mention is that what Naomi Klein sees is a lack. She's hoping for some agentivity, for some more agentivity through the understanding of what's happening, of the pattern, so we can react, and by being conscious, we can actually offer a response to what's happening. But she was not as optimistic as one could be, in a sense, because she did see that there was a lack of agentivity due to a class and race overlap. And that's something to which we're going to come back to today, which is the concept of what concept can I convoke if I say there is a class and race overlap. It's a trendy concept that you must have heard of in the past few years. I repeat, she says, or I perceive that she says, there is a lack of agentivity due to a class or race overlap, a class and race overlap. And I'm asking you if you could maybe replace the word overlap by a more conceptual word, and actually a famous and trendy concept.
I'm going to say, I don't know.
That's not the concept.
Well, haven't you written it down? Intersectionality. I mean,
it is.
Is that what you're talking about?
So if you have opened the document, then
well, obviously.
Well, okay, thanks, guys.
What do you expect me to do? To just download it, look at it, but not open it, and not read it?
I was not sure that you opened it. I'm
got
happy
it there,
that
mate.
Some people did. So, okay, it's international and intersectionality. You heard of it, right?
No.
No?
No, sorry. I do know the word, just not in that context. Sorry. Do carry on.
In which context?
Well, I know what an intersecting things are. Yeah. So intersectionality is where they crisscross each other or cross paths with each other.
Yeah.
So in that context, in terms of language, I suppose.
Are you saying that the word intersectionality exists already before it's conceptualized in terms of sociology?
No, intersection.
I have no idea whether it exists externally to sociology. All I know is that I can understand it based upon linguistic knowledge and
Exactly.
how words
exactly.
are formed.
Yeah, and we're gonna come back to intersection actually, which is the mathematical concept first.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Wonderful. And 5 and last, I think, yeah. Understanding the present case thanks to instances of the past, and we mentioned similitude. That was what was not even a tool, but the aspect that was helping us and helping Naomi Klein to figure out how to reach the level of conceptualization. If I have a similarity or similitude between a number of instances, then I can subsume. That's a nice word in philosophy. Subsume is when you go up to conceptualize a bunch of things. Subsume. They go underneath this concept. And we could notice in this topic, which I didn't mention, the stylistic use of the figure of speech named anaphora, which just means repetition of a word or expression, a president. And that's something that we have a little bit as well in the next article. And something that reminds us maybe of the allocation of the French president François Hollande when he was trying to promote himself as a president. In this case that we are considering now, a president is not something that she mentions as a way of promoting the actual president, right? She's using that tool, the anaphora, to actually, what's the expression? Hammer the nail that a president like that is a very bad president, is a president in whom we can expect some kind of evil strategy.
Is that, can I just ask, because is that because Hollande was to be seen, in inverted commas, as the man in the street that most people would vote for because he is Mr. Normal, totally opposite to Sarkozy, Mr. Bling, and that evil in the sense that he didn't live up to any of that. In fact, he said that the French people were sans dents, without teeth.
Yeah, he said that way after, during his presidency. Yes.
So it's that is the evil strategy, to completely about face, as it were, not do what the people would want, but something else. Ish.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I get it.
I was not talking about Hollande, but you're making a very good comparison. Yes.
Okay. Oh, I thought you said Hollande.
No, I was just mentioning that Hollande used the same strategy to actually promote himself.
Right.
But the anaphora to promote himself during a televised speech. And here a newspaper article, and she's using the same kind of figure of speech to actually hammer the nail on the head of that president, hopefully, or on us in our wound, the wound that Trump makes in our body.
Got it.
To let us understand that he's a president who is like that and like that and like that. So probably not a president from whom we can expect a good response in a situation of disaster, but on the very opposite, a president from whom we can expect evil strategy to profit from this disaster. Okay. And you can actually, as you see, link that article, maybe I mentioned it before, to another article that describes the augmentation of wealth of the billionaires in the US, I think, during the pandemic. Okay, now we're ready for session 2, thinking of an experience. That's theme 3.1, thinking of an experience, a short film from Paris Je t'aime, 14e arrondissement. I'm glad because I said Paris Je t'aime with quite a little American accent. How did you like the movie?
Je l'ai déjà.
No, did you like the movie? This particular clip? This particular shot?
I have the movie, so yes, I do know that. Yeah, yeah.
I was a bit... Sorry, I interrupted. I was quite mixed about it. Is this the one that was on the reading list for the first week? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I was very mixed because I'm pleased for the. If I'm not giving the plot away, I'm pleased for the American or the North American, if she's Canadian, going to Paris and marveling, but also I find it a bit sad that she has to feel that she has to escape where she is to feel somehow different. I thought that was I thought it was a bit sad in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I haven't seen it for a week. You're grimacing. You're not in agreement.
What, me?
Yeah.
Is it my grimace? Yeah, you're right. I'm not in agreement. It reminded me. Actually, I really liked it because it reminded me of when I first came to England and my English wasn't very good. And that feeling of, on the one hand, the excitement of being here, on the other hand, that social isolation and that feeling of loss as well. So it's kind of like a happy, sad thing of like being here but not really belonging, and all of those opposite feelings that she had, those polarized feelings, were very much how I felt when I came here. So so I kind of really related to that. I mean, I didn't like her accent. That really irritated me, but because I really think you should make an effort to have a vaguely decent accent in another language. But on the other hand, I kind of thought, well, I really related to those feelings of that were,
Oh, it's good. It's good.
Anybody else who would like to share their take?
I can chime in here. I can definitely confirm she's American. And yeah, the accent is a little grating sometimes, but it's a good. I like it because it feels honest. That's how it feels, and even if it is a little bit sad that she has to be removed from her home for it, at least she's being honest with herself that these are the experiences she's going through. So I appreciate that honesty.
Cool. Yuck, Matt?
I've got to apologise. I haven't done my homework.
Oh no! Don't disappear!
It's good that you disappear now.
Come back.
Matt?
Yeah, I found it quite sad actually. I found it like it was nice. I mean, there was some lovely moments in it, and the accent was quite strange, and I thought it was quite kind of curious to hear the accent, because that's how I would speak French if I spoke French, and like you say, then I'd have to make the effort to not speak in that accent. And I kind of hadn't even thought about the kind of dual moment of that sense of isolation that you mentioned, Valerie, and that's actually one of the reasons I don't travel. I can't stand that sense, and so after I was in my 20s, I stopped going abroad because I just permanently hated that particular sensation. And just thought, oh, I can't, unless I can learn to speak and not feel so isolated. It was just a terribly alienating experience, and so I had no, But it was the bit at the end where she's sitting there, and for some reason her beauty moment has to be joy and sadness together, and it's that kind of, it's a kind of that made me feel sad that she couldn't just have joy, in a sense, and that somehow this was somehow better, and that was kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird. I don't quite like that. Obviously it's nice for her, she likes it, but yeah, I don't.
But there is the theory that you cannot have one without the other, without having the opposite thought in any kind of idea, in any kind of feeling, there's always the opposite that occurs to a greater or lesser extent. So that was just very sort of in evidence rather than what we normally experience. But no, it's just me.
Can I interject? I think on behalf of Richard. Richard has posted. Antoine, have you seen his messages?
Yeah, I just saw it. Read it for us.
Why is he not?
I'm doing this for you, Richard, on your behalf, okay? I found unbearable the war between notion of Paris and concept of Paris. She's somewhere where she recognizes buildings, but there are not Parisians.
What?
And then he just puts comma, missing David, 11 years late, exclamation mark. But then again, that might mean something to you guys. I don't know.
Yeah, that was the boyfriend she was referring to, wasn't it?
Okay.
Oh yeah.
When
Very
she
good
said
point.
she wishes she had someone to share with, and she referred to this boyfriend from 11 years ago.
Yeah. So let's come back to this movie in the perspective of the title of our course, which is Thinking Our Present, and I think it's quite an interesting movie in that sense. First, I would like to ask you that question: when does the story happen? Well, I would say it depends on what we hear, what we mean by story.
I put always, which I know wasn't, because it was actually set in the past. She was referring back to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought for her, it's an always, because that story is very much part of who she is. And it's part of her makeup, therefore it's an always. But that,
so she's back home in Colorado, right? Back where exactly, more precisely?
Was she in a class? Was she recounting an experience in French?
Yeah, she's back at the language school. And she's doing that as a homework.
Ironic.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, right at the start, isn't it? Yeah.
Sorry.
Got that.
When does the story happen? When does the story happen? Well, it depends. She's narrating it when she's back in Colorado, but it obviously happened a few weeks or months before when she did that trip. And so there's this distinction in narratology, which is the science of narration, made by, amongst others, Genette, between story or storyline and narration. The narration is when a person says the story, and the story is when the story happened, which can even be in the future, actually, if you're predicting the future. How many roles does Carol play in this story? Which ones? Is she different in those two roles, in those roles? She plays?
Well, American Tourist is one of them. Mother of Dogs, Lonely Single, Strong Single, Wide-Eyed Discoverer. Is that what you're talking about? Well,
no, but that's good too. That's very good too.
I kind of get the feeling maybe these are not quite what you were looking for.
No, but that's no problem.
Yeah.
I was thinking about a very simple answer. She's at the same time the narrator and the protagonist.
Oh.
Protagonist means she's the main character, right?
Yeah.
Almost the only character, in a sense. And is she different in those two roles? Is she different depending on the tongue she speaks, and how so?
She seems very afraid of offending people when she speaks in French.
She seems a bit shy.
She's considerate, yeah.
Very sweet in a way, more self-assured in English. Huh? You heard that switch when she was talked to by someone in the street, and she was looking for a place to eat, a nice place to eat, and the person immediately speaks to her in English, which is not what she wanted. And then she takes a new tone of voice, which
Yeah, but
is
she
more...
lowers her eyes. She lowers her eyes, whereas she speaks very directly to the person when she speaks in French, which to me came across as quite confident. You know, here's my question, I'm saying it in French, how well do I speak? You know, I'm delivering it and I'm really confident with it. And then when the woman speaks to her, you know, in English, she's kind of like, oh, it was more of a to me, she was more deflated, and sort of, and then became a bit shy. It's like, oh, right, yeah, so yeah, you don't think my French is good enough, kind of thing, and like, you know, scurrying, oh yeah, I'll have Chinese, or I'm in Paris, but yeah, I'll eat Chinese. You know, it's sort of, so to me there was that. I didn't see her as more confident. I saw her as more deflated and suddenly like losing the wish to live, really, or speak.
That's totally cool, because that's not so much related to the topic of the course. So if we have different opinions, that's cool. And what is funny, sad in the story? Well, I think we just mentioned that. Why? Can you think of specific details that are funny, sad, and what makes them so? Okay, we mentioned the dogs, we mentioned the latest boyfriend, etc. Does the film belong to one genre?
I don't know why I was going to say documentary, but it's because it's just a portrait of her own life.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, it is not a documentary. It is a fiction that looks like a documentary in a way.
Okay, thanks.
And I don't know if documentary and fiction are genres. I wouldn't say they are. But it's a good question. Any other answer for that question? Does it belong to one specific genre? I would say no, unless we consider tragicomedy a genre, which is a mixed genre. Tragicomedy. It's quite tragic in a way. Sorry?
I've heard of genres and other types of maybe more different cultures and different literature from other parts of the world. Like in Asia, I've heard of something called a slice of life genre, where it's like very real, short vignettes type of thing.
Excellent. Yeah.
But they're very short. They're usually very short. It's just like a slice of something. So
yeah, that would apply very well, actually.
Yeah, that's I like that term. I've not heard that before. But I mean, because when you say genre, I think, is it science fiction? Is it comedy? Is it, you know, you know what I mean? There's a kind of, is it a Western? You know? And then there's these other films that supposedly are, and there's a kind of demeaning relationship to a genre film. You know, it's like if you like genre films, somehow you're a bit stupid because they're kind of like, they're prepackaged in a sort of pre-existing script or form or something, and somehow you're just, you know, you're not watching something intelligent. And then there's these films that are supposedly non-genre, and they're always like this. They're always essentially watching sad people talk about their sad lives, and it's like, you know, and somehow we're meant to feel like this is real or something. And it's like, actually, you know, if I want sad people to talk about their sad lives, I'll go to the pub with my mates. You know?
Those were in the days when you could go to the pub, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That would be a genre in the video club named drama, no? Even though drama etymologically means action, so kind of silly. Yeah, but tragicomedy seems to me the most relevant name for this short. But slice of life is wonderful as well. A tragicomic slice of life.
Slice of life sounds a tiny bit nicer as well, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but there is an event that makes us wonder if it is not more than just a movie inside the tragic comedy genre. And I am asking if there is a particular event that has more importance. Is it what we could call an event, though? What name would you give to that type of events?
Awareness.
Awareness, interesting. So I'm helping you with the image I selected, right? If you have opened the document, there's this image of Carol on a bench in a park.
Yeah, I didn't look at that.
And I'm not going to say more about it because it's in my next questions to ask for more. So you see what image I'm talking about? It's around minute 5. Actually, I selected 4:59. And it's written, then something happened. Et puis quelque chose est arrivé, I think she says.
Well, it's that moment of awareness, that duality that's talking about.
Moment of awareness, yeah. The concept of awareness was made famous by Jean-Claude Van Damme in France.
No.
So I would, in that, Jean-Claude Van Damme, who is this famous action movie actor, was really funny on TV by saying that he was aware. And since the word awareness and aware have become jokes. So I would prefer in that sense to find another word that is a bit more Greek and therefore philosophical.
Reflective. That's not.
But can we think, that's a beautiful word to reflective, but can we think of something that is totally Greek and that describes these kinds of these particular moments in life when there is an awareness? So if we don't find the word, it's okay. I will provide it.
I would say it's epiphanic.
Exactly. That was Epiphany, yeah. With a Y in English and IE in French. An epiphany. Okie dokie. What name you give to that type of events? Epiphany. How does this event contrast existentially and cinematographically with the rest of the sequence? That's what I wrote. Of the story.
Help us out here, Matt.
I'm not the only one who's seen it.
Sorry, Margaret, you're already there.
Well, I was just going to start with something obvious. She's in a place where she doesn't know much about what's going on. So for an instant, she really clues in. She really clicks. She understands what's going on around her, at least, or what she's experiencing 100%. She feels like she's fully cognizant.
Yeah, and cinematic. I mean, cinematically, there's this very classic zoom in, and there's a backlit frame.
Backlit.
You know what I mean, she's backlit, so her hair gives the halo, but the camera zooms in. There's a certain moment at which it zooms in quite quickly, so it's like a typical cinematic move to draw attention to something. You know what I mean? And then
so
her face.
Zoom in, and another technical aspect.
Say that again, sorry.
Sorry?
Say that again, sorry.
There's another technical device that kind of singularizes that moment.
Richard has said something. He's used the word, and I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, but you can probably read it, Deus ex machina.
God in the machine.
Deus ex machina? Maybe. I don't. I don't see it as such. To me, Deus ex machina is two potential things. Is when, okay, Deus ex machina. Okay, it's when. Okay, that I guess I understand, but it's not a technical device. So Deus is God, right? Ex machina, from the machine. You have that in the Don Juan by Molière, when the statue of the commander punishes Don Juan. So it's a character somehow that is a godly figure that intervenes in the story to play the role of God. And so in a sense, the light and maybe the epiphany is a Deus ex machina. Yeah. Yes, but that's a certain interpretation that kind of reinserts transcendence in a short film where you could say there is no transcendence except for maybe the light of the sun, which is not transcendence. Well, there's something very easy, but you would have to listen to the movie again, is that all through the movie, there's this kind of elevator music, joyful elevator music, and all of a sudden, it stops, and we hear the sounds of the many noises in the park. Details. So it's a type of sound that ceases for another one to emerge and kind of take precedence. The is more prevalent from there. And that's when you understand that she actually finds a sort of harmony with what's around her. She's no more looking for a certain vision of Paris that she's trying to find in reality, like trying to fulfill a dream or fantasy with reality. She's just at peace and in the pace of that moment, in harmony with exterior things. And in a sense, there's a kind of relief. So to come back to the title of our course, which is Thinking Our Present, it's interesting, this movie, because first we started with the idea that the story was set in two different moments, when she narrates the story and when the story happened. And then inside the story, we have a specific moment, a singular moment, in which time seems to stop. And the present is given as a present. She's no more looking for things, activating herself, etc., kind of distorted by time. She is set in time, feeling the present, feeling the presence. But what's interesting and pretty Derridian in a way is that Derridian is an adjective made out of Derrida, who is a wonderful philosopher of the second half of the 20th century who got really famous in the US, as you know. What is very Derridian in a way is that even that moment of presence is told through language in the future. So even the moment of presence and of the present is distorted in time. right? I don't know if distorted is the best word. Am I using a good word, distorted? Yeah.
Well, it's a lovely word, if that's what you mean.
I like it, but I'm not sure it's the best.
I mean, if she wasn't present, where was she?
Sorry, Helen, can you repeat that?
I was just wondering, if she wasn't present, where was she?
She was present. She was present, but as we said at first, when she narrates the story and when she says, then something happened, she's not saying that at the very moment when she feels harmony. She's saying that later when she's back in Colorado at her language school and she's reading her homework, her paper, narrating this experience that she had in Paris. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, she becomes the narrator, so she becomes present.
She becomes the narrator, therefore the present and the presence is something more complex than we can think of by just saying, oh, she's there. She's there, yes, but actually she's there and she's realizing this presence in the future compared to this moment, but actually this moment is the past.
Yeah. A moment in the past which had become, and now she was back in that moment when she was narrating what, you know, what she wanted to become.
Yeah, in a sense she coincides as a narrator with this moment. So it's very beautiful in a way because you know that Spinoza thinks or says in his ethics that we feel and we experience that we are immortal, or no, eternal, sorry, eternal. And maybe she felt eternal in that moment. And the moment in which she narrates the story is a moment of conscientization, something that becomes conscious about that very moment she lived. A moment that you lived and you had such a presence in it that it almost felt that you reached something eternal. Okay, maybe I'm over-interpreting. I hope not. And it's been 1 hour we've been talking, especially me. So if you have more to say on that, you're welcome. If not, we take a break. More to say?
Well, there's a few messages, just
Yeah.
so that you know.
There was one question actually I had about that kind of piece, because at that last moment, she has her own kind of epiphany, but at the heart of that is that last line. It seems to be the last line, which seems very strange. And I felt Paris fall in love with me. Now, I mean, that would be a really bizarre sensation, and that would be kind of like, you know, yes, I mean, I can imagine that being an intensely kind of epiphanic moment, but I can't even conceive of what that would. I mean, I didn't know whether that was something that was like a bad translation of something that's said in French that has a different connotation, or because it just seems a very, very. It's like the last line of the piece, and yet it's a really strange idea of a city falling in love with you.
Yeah. Do you know the exact moment? Maybe
It's the last 30 seconds. It's the absolute last line. She feels herself falling in love with Paris, and I felt Paris fall in love with me.
I have it.
Just emerging. Sorry.
Go on, say it.
Isn't it just emerging? You know, when you fall in love with something or someone, there is a merging of love. So I assume that's what she meant. I didn't actually give it much thought, so maybe that's my failing.
And what's interesting in this love is that it's completely depersonalized, because it's nobody in particular in Paris who symbolizes this love towards her, as it could be the French lover. She's not falling in love with the typical French lover. experience is somehow more interesting.
What if you could kind of transform it a little and say she's falling in love with herself, like she goes somewhere to find herself and then she finds that she can see herself, and flip it that way.
Yeah, but wouldn't that impoverish a little bit the interaction between her and something that is not her, the outside world?
Is it something to do with time?
Can you explicit your question?
Well, if she fell back into time, you're saying she fell back into time. So she's falling, like Paris fell in love with her at the same moment she fell back into time. So it must have something to do with the way that time was working.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel, Margaret, you wanted to add something.
Well, I mean, I'm just spitballing at this point. Like, if the experience is eternal, then the self wouldn't change. And then if you recognize something, would you recognize yourself? Would you recognize yourself in something you didn't know? Like, Paris could still be the unknown, but you don't recognize yourself within that piece.
I think if she fell out of time and survived it and then fell back into time, then she felt that she could trust Paris, I think.
So I'm first gonna say something of Margaret's opinion or interpretation, and then I don't know, I'm not the one saying the ultimate interpretation on this film, even though I've seen it many times. I think your take on it is quite Leibnizian, because Leibniz has this famous sentence, which is, there are as many cities as people inside the city. So I feel that your interpretation is that she's not even falling in love with the actual city, but with an image of the city that reconciles her with herself somehow, with what she has to find in herself, that kind of moments to reconcile with herself. And so in a sense, I think you have a very deep interpretation in a Leibnizian way. But personally, I prefer not to interiorize, sorry, I took this very French accent to say the word, interiorize exteriority too much, because the actual world is actually outside us. If you read physicists, it's not just here, right? Even though what we perceive is just here, but yeah. And about Helen, I think you have a very deep remark too, because you're trying to blend the idea of happiness and harmony with the idea of coming back towards, consciously coming back to what you experienced, and therefore getting a better sense of love through this mental experience of time. So both work. Let's take a break.
And just so that you know, Richard has posted a few things there, and it might be, if you could.
Yeah, I can open the, yeah.
Yeah, so that he just gets a reflection back on what you might think in your own time. I'm not.
So, yeah, okay, I will read that during the break.
Sounds good. I'm just going to cover it for a second. Right. Was she not daydreaming to have more money and go back to Paris to become a postwoman to interact with real persons and she reconciles her dreams with her own reality? Antoine, I think it is hot in Nice.
Sorry?
I'm thinking it is hot in Nice, Antoine.
Yeah, it's hot. Today was really hot in the sun. Yeah.
Even here we've had good weather, huh?
Oh yeah?
La Côte Anglaise. Today it's been a bit cloudy, but the past few days, you know, enough sunshine to sit on the beach as long as you are social distancing. So we've had that. We've had some sunshine, which, as you know, is not always the case. So it's good.
I remember eating my first veggie burger at Brighton.
It's the right sort of place for a veggie burger. You're right. You're right.
I discovered a very good Bowie album there, Reality. You know that?
I don't know that one. No.
It's a very good one.
But that's great. It's good to find things in new places, and then you've got them. You've got them for eternity.
Yeah, you associate experiences, the sound of David Bowie with Brighton.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah.
Are you in France?
Yeah, Nice.
My sister lives in Paris.
Cool. Mine too. But they are not the same people, right? They are not the same.
Yeah, my father lives in Paris. My mum lives dans l'Allier. Where do your parents live?
My parents, they live in this house that I am in right now, in Villefranche-sur-Mer, right?
C'est pratique, ça.
Don't tell the Chinese people, they will find me.
No, it makes me feel so homesick, being forced to stay in England.
But you're French? Yeah, you're French?
Yeah. I was brought up in France.
You said that today. Valérie is very, very French. Even though there is this Amy Winehouse song.
Valerie.
Yeah.
Oh.
Very good, very good.
It's a great song, isn't it? With Mark Ronson. Was it done? Mark Ronson did a version?
I don't know. I just said to be enthusiastic.
No, I don't know too much about music, but I think he jazzed it up a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, she played with great musicians.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start the new text. Which what do you feel like doing in priority? The newspaper article or the chapter from Disgrace? Who votes
the Grace one.
Disgrace?
Grace.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do disgrace. That's actually the order we had on the paper. Okay. And we start, we're gonna read disgrace in a kind of Barthesian way. Roland Barthes is a great literary critique and theorist of literature who gave lessons at the Collège de France. Thanks to Michel Foucault, actually, who invited him, who proposed him as a new professor there. And he only gave, I think, 3 years of lessons because he died out of an accident. He was bumped into by a truck near the Collège de France. So we lost not only a wonderful person, but also a lot of wisdom from the years he didn't teach there. And he would have taught. Yeah.
He writes a wonderful book called The Lover's Discourse, which
exactly.
It's
wonderful
a fantastic
introduction to his. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. It blew me away when I read that.
And the one I'm referring to right now is called S upon Z, which is a book where he analyzes a novella by Balzac called Sarrazin, hence the S upon Z, Sarrazin. And actually it's more complex than that, but okay. And he analyzes the text lexi by lexi, which means he takes a bit of a sentence and then says something analytically and continues like that. So that's what we're going to do right now. And I propose doing it by saying, well, Scott, would you start the reading?
I would if I had the text in front of me. I know I'm annoying. I'm annoying in that sense. Is there any way of having the text there? Matt, go on.
I kind of put it online, I think.
I can probably link it into this chat.
Please, thank you. Cheers, Matt. Very good of you.
Did everybody read it?
Yeah.
I read some of it.
That's cool. So, I think it would be nice to hear your voice say the first paragraph, Scott, and then we'll see if we're not going faster than reading the whole thing, because I kind of feel like doing the two texts today and we don't have much time. So let's try just the beginning.
Okay.
It's in
I've
chat
just
there,
got to
so
press download on that, okay? Or do I just click on the where it says PDF, Matt?
Yeah, you should just be able to click on it and you'll open your PDF reader.
And if not, I'm going to have to ask someone else to read in my place. It's not actually doing a great deal, so I'm going to press download. Oh, right. It's asking me to save it.
Matt, would you read the beginning?
I can read the beginning if you want.
We can wait for Scott if he's.
I'm finding it. I'm technologically challenged at this point. Even more so than normal.
Okay, let's start with Matt. I think a male voice would do well here.
Yeah, particularly a male voice that's nearly 52.
Yeah. I didn't
So
say
mine, Matt. It would make no difference.
It didn't help, did it, when you're reading it? For a man of his age, 52, divorced, he has, to his mind, solved the problem of sex rather well. On Thursday afternoons, he drives to Greenpoint. Punctually at 2 p.m, he presses the buzzer at the entrance to Windsor Mansions, speaks his name, and enters. Waiting for him at the door to number 113 is Soraya. He goes straight through to the bedroom, which is pleasant smelling and softly lit, and undresses. Soraya emerges from the bathroom, drops her robe, slides into bed beside him. "Have you missed me?" she asks. "I miss you all the time," he replies. He strokes her honey brown body, unmarked by the sun. He stretches her out, kisses her breasts. They make love. Soraya is tall and slim, with long black hair and dark liquid eyes. Technically, he is old enough to be her father, but then technically one can be a father at 12. He has been on her books for over a year. He finds her entirely satisfactory. In the desert of the week, Thursday has become an oasis of lux et volupté.
Merci. Lux et volupté, which we'll comment soon. Okay. What I propose to do is I give you pieces of that text and then you comment on them as freely as you want, but by saying very short things, conceptual as possible. Yeah, you don't give your opinions on anything yet. We're just kind of trying to do the same work we've done last week, conceptualization, problematization, but in a different pace and with textual anchors all the time. Okay, so first, Lexi solved the problem of sex rather well. Comments? Nothing yet? Okay. Soraya?
Solve the problem is a kind of mathematical formulation almost, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Soraya, satisfactory.
Objects.
Objects. There's a concept which is, I think, commodification.
Yes.
Luxe et volupté.
Well,
I think it might be something to do with his age.
Yeah?
definitely, but also it's to do with that commodification again, in terms of just worshipping her physical being, but objectifying, because it's only the physical being that we're talking about.
Good. Luxe et volupté, Valérie, comment?
Pardon, quoi?
Luxe et volupté.
Ouais, et alors? Je sais pas ce que je peux dire de plus.
Baudelaire.
Pardon? What?
Baudelaire.
Right.
So intertextuality. This is a famous phrase from a poem by Baudelaire. Luxe, calme et volupté. Invitation au voyage, if my memory is correct.
It seems a very simple process that he's going through, and that simplicity can...
Yeah.
Continue, Helen. That's really good.
Helen?
Lost you.
Yep, sorry, hello.
What did you say?
It could be something to do with the simplicity of the process, which is quite beautiful.
Okay. When I say okay, it's not that it's just that I don't know what to do with your comment yet, but at some point I might. Soraya's paradox, did we mention that? Maybe, Scott, if you have the text, do you?
Well, I still haven't got the text, but
Matt, can you read a bit more? In bed?
Yep, sure. Hang on. Where
That's
are we?
a famous American joke. You add in bed at the end of every sentence.
There was a sentence by Richard there, if anybody wants to read it.
Okay, yeah. Contentment, but not happiness or fulfillment at a possible middle life crisis. Yes, for sure. Indeed. Very good note. Very good note.
Shall I carry on with the reading?
Yeah.
In bed, Soraya is not effusive. Her temperament is in fact rather quiet and docile. In her general opinions, she is surprisingly moralistic. She is offended by tourists who bare their breasts, udders, she calls them, on public beaches. She thinks vagabonds should be rounded up and put to work sweeping the street. How she reconciles her opinions with a line of business he does not ask. Because he takes pleasure in her, because his pleasure is unfailing, an affection has grown up in him for her. To some degree, he believes this affection is reciprocated. Affection may not be love, but it is at least its cousin. Given their unpromising beginnings, they have been lucky, the two of them, he to have found her, she to have found him.
Thank you. So first, Soraya's paradox, right? Which is comments a moral paradox, right? Maybe ethical even.
No, I don't think so. I think that he's got his morals in the right place. I mean, he loves her, right?
No, but yes, but that's not what I'm saying. I don't know. We don't know yet if he loves her, but he does have affection for her. What I'm saying is that Soraya is paradoxical to him because she's very judgmental on a moralistic way, towards even tourists who show their breasts at the beach, and when she's actually a prostitute. So there's kind of a paradox in there, in his mind.
Yeah, but it's not as simple as that for her.
Of course not. No. I'm not saying she's a simple character at all, for sure. Yeah, good point. Next. No, Soria's paradox, he does not ask. Interesting, no?
It's all assumptions.
Come on, Valerie.
Assumptions.
And he doesn't want to dig deep and kind of, how do you say?
Stir the pot.
Stir some dispute or some possible conflict with her, which it's not said, right? But he wants to stay on a level of pure affection, no intellectual disputes, even though she would probably be capable to counter argument very well.
Is it lack of intimacy? What? It's a lack of intimacy. He doesn't want intimacy.
It's more than that, isn't it? To my mind, it's that he wants it all on his own terms.
Yeah.
He wants a woman that's 20, 30 years younger, who's obviously a stunner, and that he doesn't have to speak to. Am I wrong so far?
I don't think so. I think the rest of the chapters go into this direction, direction. Yeah, pleasure, affection. Because he takes pleasure in her, because his pleasure is unfailing, and affection has grown up in him for her.
But he assumes again, he assumes again that it's reciprocated. Getting as a prostitute, it is unlikely to be. There's this lack
We're
of.
almost there. The idea of reciprocation, which is coming a bit further down with, he believes this affection is reciprocated. And then we have something that is textually or stylistically very good in terms of his mind, the way he represents that in his mind, because you have he to have found her, she to have found him, which is what we would call a chiasm. Chiasm. How do you say it in English? Chiasm?
Chasm is like cavernous, isn't it?
It's a cross. So CHIASM. Chiasm. Not schism. Chiasm. It's when it goes in both directions. And it's exactly what this sentence is. He to have found her, she to have found him. Chiasm.
Chasm.
Okay, cool.
Or chasm, maybe, actually.
Matt, more, please.
Okay, 2 seconds. His sentiments are, he is aware, complacent, even uxorious. Nevertheless, he does not cease to hold to them. For a 90-minute session, he pays her 400 rand, of which half goes to discreet escorts. It seems a pity that discreet escorts should get so much, but they own number 113 and other flats in Windsor Mansions. In a sense, they own Soraya too, this part of her, this function. He has toyed with the idea of asking her to see him in her own time. He would like to spend an evening with her, perhaps even a whole night, but not the morning after. He knows too much about himself to subject her to a morning after, when he will be cold, surly, impatient to be alone.
Stop. Thank you very much. 400 round, discrete escorts, own, function. And I actually wrote on my beautiful textbook, 400 rounds and below own, and discrete escorts and below function. And I want you to comment. If you will.
Could you
Let's
repeat?
continue. Temperament, surly, within. Within, I say it loud because it might come back in the future. Morning after. Temperament, surly, within, morning after. Any comment?
Yeah, I think that temporal's quite an interesting word.
Temperament?
No, oh, I thought you said temporal.
No, temperament. Maybe I pronounce it badly.
But I think in reference to it being a temporary situation.
Yeah, I guess temperament has to do with time as well, in a sense. It's kind of your moods. It has to do with moods. But it's kind of something. Yeah.
Temperament is kind of more of a fixed.
Yeah, it's
aspect of
an
this.
identity of your moods. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it has to do with time as well, because he knows he's not much of a lover in the morning.
But the thing is, he's kind of controlling when he sees her, though, isn't he?
Yeah, completely.
And he's also controlling, like, by giving money as well. That's controlling as well, isn't it?
And 400 rounds, exactly.
Well, it's not so much him. I mean, there's the other part later in the chapter. Doesn't it say that she can only be seen on afternoons?
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually the agency that controls when he can go and determines the price. So even though he controls her with the payment, they control him with how much they ask.
Excellent. So she's kind of owned more by the agency than by him. That's what he realizes.
Does he want to fight that?
Yeah, there are instances in which he wants to see her more. Actually, yeah, further in the text, he considers the possibility of that. I don't know if fighting would be the good word. He's considering the possibility, that's more so. Matt? Do you think we should continue reading and proceed this way, even though it's longer, or should I just say the words and you remember the text enough?
I quite like it being read personally.
Okay, Matt, your turn, if you will.
That is his temperament. His temperament is not going to change. He's too old for that. His temperament is fixed, set. The skull followed by the temperament, the two hardest parts of the body. Follow your temperament. It is not a philosophy. He would not dignify it with that name. It is a rule, like the rule of St. Benedict. He is in good health. His mind is clear. By profession he is, or has been, a scholar, and scholarship still engages intermittently the core of him. He lives within his income, within his temperament, within his emotional means. Is he happy? By most measurements, yes, he believes he is. However, he has not forgotten the last chorus of Oedipus, call no man happy until he is dead. In the field of sex, his temperament, though intense, has never been passionate. Were he to choose a totem, it would be the snake. Intercourse between Soraya and himself must be, he imagines, rather like the copulation of snakes, lengthy, absorbed, but rather abstract, rather dry, even at its hottest. Is Soraya's totem the snake too? No doubt with other men she becomes another woman, la donna immobile. Yet at the level of temperament, her affinity with him can surely not be feigned.
Thank you.
That,
Sorry to interrupt.
no, that's good.
First, scholar, core of him. Scholar, core of him. And then intermittently. And then I'm asking you to think about the Oedipus. Oedipus, which is here in italics, right? Which means it's referring not to the character, but to the very work. And he knows the ending of that tragedy. Call no man happy until he's dead. Actually, the text gives us the ending lesson or moral of this tragedy.
Sorry, I'm going to take off the hook.
And again, it's intertextuality. I said this word before with lux et volupté. Intertextuality is simply when a text is referring to another text, right? But what does that tell us about this text?
Sorry, I put down the phone for a reason. Hello? Parce que maman, je suis en plein cours là. There we go. Someone from France. Had to explain it. Sorry about that.
Living mothers.
Incredible. Anyways.
Thank you. It was cool. So what does it, the fact that we have an insistence on intertextuality, what does it say about this text? Does it say that the author is quite pretentious and need to bring back always his culture? Or does it say something else? Well, let's continue. Animal totem. Anybody has something to say about the animal totem? No?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean the snake is something that sheds its skin a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's constantly sort of rebirthing. It's kind of like if you imagine a snake traveling through the sand and shredding its skin at the same. It's kind of, yeah, that's the kind of thing I get about the snake.
So it's the idea that we have
Really?
later with La Donna e Mobile of change, of being able to undertake metamorphoses. Very good, interesting. Adapt with change.
It's renewing, isn't it?
Sorry?
Well, it's not a
No, I just think
because it still remains the same, doesn't it? A snake doesn't metamorphosize into something else.
Good point.
It's a renewing of the self, isn't it?
And the snake, of course, is also an intertextual reference to the Bible as the Genesis, right? And a symbol of sexuality, male sexuality. Matt, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, now you say that, of course, yeah, I mean, that didn't come to my mind at all, actually, the biblical thing. And I was just slightly thrown the minute he wanted the minute he said a totem, and it was like, it seemed incongruous. But yes, I can see that there's probably that if you read it biblically, yes, there's definitely
but
that.
But the totem, you're right, may call for a different interpretation than the Bible. Maybe we're coming back to the Bible too often. But maybe it's still there. Maybe Coetzee is referring to cultural aspects of South Africa that I'm not aware of, or maybe also the Bible, because South Africa is, I think, pretty Christian as well as other things. And animal totem, La Donna e Mobile. Okay, we commented that a little bit. So I wanted to tell you the answer as far as what intertextuality can be a sign of in this text. It's a sign of the fact that we are in the character's mind. The character here, as opposed to in the short film that we saw before is not the narrator. There is an author, could see, a narrator who doesn't have a name, and a character who is named David Lurie. And as we saw last time with free and direct speech, the narrator integrates elements of discourse, ideas, streams of consciousness of the character, of the main protagonist, in the discourse. And sometimes it's hard to tell if it's the narrator or the character. But one thing that's not hard to tell is that, yes, as Scott and Valerie were saying, we are seeing this from the point of view of David Lurie. David Lurie, who is a humanities professor and who thinks through references to many texts. Okay, let's continue. Though
by occupation she is a loose woman, he trusts her within limits. During their sessions, he speaks to her with a certain freedom, even on occasion unburdens himself. She knows the facts of his life. She has heard the stories of his 2 marriages, knows about his daughter and his daughter's ups and downs. She knows many of his opinions. Of her life outside Windsor Mansions, Soraya reveals nothing. Soraya is not her real name, that he is sure of. There are signs she was born a child or children. It may be that she is not a professional at all. She may work for the agency only 1 or 2 afternoons a week, and for the rest live a respectable life in the suburbs, in Rylands or Athlone. That would be unusual for a Muslim, but all things are possible these days.
thank you. So I go fast. Trust within limits. Within, the word comes again. I mentioned it before. Within limits this time. He's paradigmatic. I talked a bit with Margaret about this text, and she was noticing that he is paradigmatic, whereas she's moralistic. Could you elaborate a bit on that, Margaret, or do you remember when we talked about it?
I believe it was based on this idea that he is creating I forget how I phrased it, paradigmatic, in that there's this sense of boundaries going on. She won't let him, she won't reveal more, so the boundary exists for her. And then he is not willing to cross over the bounds to look at other things that are outside of the bounds. And to that spoke to me because in Cape Town, it's a very, the city is built around boundaries about where people can go a lot. So in some ways that might be kind of playing into the character's mindset a little bit. It was just something I noticed having dealt with or having learned about Cape Town recently. So.
Yeah, and I think the idea came from the fact that we noticed that she's paradoxically, or he notices, and therefore we notice, that she's paradoxically moralistic in a way. Mm-hmm. And you were saying, yes, maybe he's moralistic, but he's paradigmatic in a sense, which is even more moralistic in a way, setting boundaries, seeing things in black and white or in binary ways. Okay, he speaks to her, freedom she knows, outside reveals nothing. Soraya, and what? We know nothing about Soraya. Soraya is not her real name. That he is sure of. What he is sure of, that he doesn't know her name. So Soraya is a mystery. And she keeps her mystery. But he kind of is content, as Richard was using the word contentment before, content with this statu quo. And he's not trying to dig into her life, because that could stir again some uneasiness and perhaps disputes.
I mean, the sense of that also, there's definitely a sense of like, you know, when he says something like her affinity with him can surely not be feigned, and a little bit earlier about, you know, for her finding him as well as him finding her, there's a clear sense of self-delusion here. You know, that's how you encounter this man as like deep, you know, like deeply self-deluded. So when you say stir it up, it's almost like stir it up with himself. He doesn't, you know, he could ask her, and it's not going to have a particular relationship, but he's going to have a relationship to whether he is still able to maintain this fiction of some sort of consent or mutuality or reciprocity. And it's you know, and when he says things like her affinity with him can surely not be feigned, it's like, of course it can bloody be feigned. That's her job. You know, that's what her job is.
And that's when that shows you have a critical distance towards the narrator, and you perceive that there is this free indirect speech and kind of mockery. The narrator is using free indirect speech, but yet we know that there is a distance between the narrator and the character, even though the speeches are together, blended, right? Excellent. Soraya, about his own job, maybe you continue, Matt?
About his own job, he says little, not wanting to bore her. He earns his living at the Cape Technical University, formerly Cape Town University College. Once a professor of modern languages, he has been, since classics and modern languages were closed down as part of the Great Rationalisation, adjunct professor of communications. Like all rationalised personnel, he is allowed to offer one special field course a year, irrespective of enrolment, because that is good for morale. This year, he is offering a course in the Romantic Poets. For the rest, he teaches Communications 101, Communication Skills, and Communications 201, Advanced Communication Skills. Although he devotes hours of each day to his new discipline, he finds its first premise, as enunciated in the Communications 101 handbook, preposterous. Human society has created language in order that we may communicate our thoughts, feelings, and intentions to each other. His own opinion, which he does not air, is that the origins of speech lie in song, and the origins of song in the need to fill out with sound the overlarge and rather empty human soul.
Thank you. As the narrator and character of the short movie we saw before, that's when I knew I fell in love with this book. About his own job, says little, technical communication skills, irrespective of enrollment, morale, romantic poets, special field. So I took those words that kind of summarize what we just read. And would you comment on those?
Very precise.
Very precise.
Technical. Go on, sorry, Helen.
No, go on, Scott.
No, I don't think I've got that much more, so I'm quite happy for you to step in.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking how the narrator sounds really jealous of the character.
I don't feel it, but if you feel it, why not? Why not? And but my question would be, this description of academia, would it say something about our present? Wouldn't it be some way, implicitly, a way the author, so I kind of bond with you here, Helen, the author is not, wouldn't say jealous, but actually ironic about the curriculum, the new curricula that are proposed in academia, and he presents it as symptomatic of our times, as a decline in the humanities, an insistence on the commodification of education to make people ready to work, to be good agents. Yeah, agents with not much agentivity in the capitalist market.
It's funding, isn't it? That's what universities do for funding. So I don't know whether that's part of the subtext of it as well.
Yeah. First premise: preposterous communicate his opinion, sound, fill out empty human soul. So we came to already with self-delusion that was proposed by Matt, some understanding of that character, that main character. And here we have a poetical way that the character sees himself, or sees not really himself here, but how he understands language, the use of language. And in a way, he finds his own interpretation so much more beautiful than the one that is given in, and it is much more beautiful than the one that is given in academia. And it is a way, him, the romantic poet specialist, that he has found to romanticize himself, right? He kind of romanticizes himself.
I think he kind of justifies his own innocence.
Yeah. You know the book? You've read the book? Helen, have you read the book?
She's gone quiet there.
Maybe. Okay. Let's continue. Scott, you have the text or not?
No.
Okay, Matt.
In the course of a career stretching about a quarter of a century, he has published 3 books, none of which has caused a stir or even a ripple. The first on opera, Boito and the Faust legend, the genesis of Mephistopheles. The second on vision as Eros, the vision of Richard of St. Victor. And the third on Wordsworth and history, Wordsworth and the burden of the past.
Pause. Genesis of Mephistopheles. 2 interesting words. The Genesis that kind of justify my interpretation of the snake before, and Mephistopheles that, as you know, has other names. And no? Yeah, he has other names. The devil and Satan.
Wow.
And Mephistopheles, it's interesting that he is interested in Mephistopheles, right? The burden of the past. Those titles, they tell us about the characters as well, much, because those books, they are fictitious books, right? They are books inside the book. They most probably don't exist. So what they are here for, those titles, is to tell us about the character again.
There's a kind of curious, like, weird intertextuality to be intertextual with books that don't exist, isn't there?
Yeah, that's a cool, that's very Borgesian, Borges.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Continue, please.
In the past few years, he's been playing with the idea of a book on Byron. At first, he had thought it would be another book, another critical opus, but all his sallies at writing it have bogged down in tedium. The truth is, he is tired of criticism, tired of prose measured by the yard. What he wants to write is music. Byron in Italy, a meditation on love between the sexes in the form of a chamber opera. Through his mind, while he faces his communications classes, flit phrases, tunes, fragments of song from the unwritten work. He has never been much of a teacher. In this transformed and, to his mind, emasculated institution of learning, he is more out of place than ever. But then, so are other of his colleagues from the old days, burdened with upbringings inappropriate to the tasks they are set to perform, clerks in a post-religious age. Because he has no respect for the material he teaches, he makes no impression on his students. They look through him when he speaks, forget his name. Their indifference galls him more than he will admit. Nevertheless, he fulfills to the letter his obligations toward them, their parents and the state. Month after month, he sets, collects, reads and annotates their assignments, correcting lapses in punctuation, spelling and usage, interrogating weak arguments, appending to each paper a brief, considered critique. He continues to teach because it provides him with a livelihood, also because it teaches him humility, brings it home to him who he is in the world. The irony does not escape him, that the one who comes to teach learns the keenest of lessons, while those who come to learn nothing. It is a feature of his profession on which he does not remark to Soraya. He doubts there is an irony to match it in hers.
Thank you. Tedium, truth, tired, criticism, never, teacher, emasculated institution, no respect, no impression on his students, indifference, fulfill the letter, months after months, considered critic, as opposed to criticism. Teaching.
No, I think.
Sorry, I'm finishing the words and then you go. Teaching, continue, livelihood, humility, irony, lesson, uncommunicability, Soraya, and you good, Helen, please.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure, but I'm kind of thinking that he's kind of trying to. I mean, he sounds quite fulfilled in those prose, in that paragraph, in his life. There's quite a lot going on, and he now describes his act with Soraya as he's quite an empty soul. Yeah. So maybe he's looking back at a life and he can't really figure out how he's become so empty.
Yeah, but you said, I think what you say is you're saying two things. I don't think he's very fulfilled with his life, right? He's tired. There's an instance of fatigue here.
No, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying that he's kind of tired of looking back at it, but actually during that time he was very fulfilled.
Okay. Oh yeah, exactly. Other comments?
I mean, the list of words you came out just made me think of like this relationship people have with their jobs, that they're very tied up in how they feel about their work, you know what I mean? And once that doesn't feel productive, useful, you know, they're kind of, I don't know, it just made me think of that kind of thing, but that's possibly just bringing.
You know, there's the concept of bullshit job by Graeber.
Yeah.
Shaw doesn't have a bullshit job, and he acknowledges it. He knows that he doesn't have a bullshit job, even though there is a tendency for his job to become more and more bullshit in his own eyes. Bullshit in the sense that he does it, he fulfills the letter, right? It's almost as if he was just someone in bureaucracy, right? But he does a considered critique. So he does his job with some application, but just enough, maybe, because he's tired of it. As Helen was saying, is no more, if he ever was, very much into it. And what do you think about the ending of this part? You see there's a space after to match it in hers. And so what do you think about the ending? Maybe, Matt, you would read it again, the irony?
So there's huge assumptions again about who she is, what her life is, what it includes, what meaning she has in it, what the reason for her job with him is. He just carries on with all these assumptions without knowing, And
there's a sort of there's this kind of superiority to his own sense of being ironic, you know, and that somehow she couldn't be as complex or have as much depth, and all this, you know. By this point, I really dislike this man.
Yeah.
So he's assuming uncommunicability between them, because of the very thing that Matt said, that there's a sense, that Valerie said as well. There's a sense that he knows what her life is made of, and he knows his own considerations, and he deems that his considerations are not the kind that she could have. Okay, it's 10 p.m. o'clock. We can stop for now. I'm going to work.
It might be 10 in France, but it's 9 o'clock here.
9.
Yeah, but you're French, so you should be on 10 p.m. by now.
Yeah, exactly. So what I suggest is we stop for today. We would carry on with this chapter next time as a beginning of next session. And then we will do the text on the protests. And I will rework the outline of the course to make it correspond to what we're actually doing.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Okay,
Any
yep.
feedback for today?
It would help if I read the text.
I watched a video in the coffee break, and I'm amazed how much you saw into 6 minutes. It was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Antoine. Thank you all, and Matt too, for reading.
Have a nice night.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you too. Cheers. Bye. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Don't forget to switch off the recording.
Yeah, cool.
Are you writing down what we're going to be needing to read for next session?
Yeah, but I'm thinking that since we haven't, yeah, I'm gonna do that. Yes.
Yes, sorry, because otherwise I'm gonna forget. I do, you know, have lesson preps and stuff, and I just.
So we're gonna finish Disgrace, do the article on the protests, and I guess the other short movie that is Arrondissement 19.
I've not seen that.
Thank you so much.
Merci, and thank you ever so much. It's lovely.
Merci.
Thank you.
Cheers now.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Oops.